It's all on the screen.
All right, good afternoon. Let the record show that it is just past 3:30. I believe we have all 5 board members present. Okay. At this time, I need a motion. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Good afternoon, Madam President, members of the board. No, there are not.
Okay. Need a motion for the approval of the agenda?
Motion to adopt the agenda.
Second. Okay. Ms. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Pimentel? Aye. Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. At this time, would everybody please join me in a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance? Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. At this time, we are on item 2A, which is our study session. This does have to do with our budget, boundaries, staffing. Ms. Agata-Jones, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board. The purpose of the study session, again, is to be able to have those conversations about what happens next in the process of Phase 1 and Phase 2. So that's what we will present to you. You'll see a quite lengthy presentation. Much of the information has been presented already, but we just want to make sure, because it does become a public document, that for those that are community members that are just joining, that they have the whole presentation. So anything that is an additional or questions that we have to answer, we will do that. But at this time, you will see much of the same information. And again, the executive team and I will do the presentation. Okay, so this again just goes back to the history. I think we're all clear that we began the process back in February 9th of 2019, where we began to look at the decline in enrollment, and then began to set out a timeline in which we would be able to do things to help with the decline in enrollment and what next steps would be. So we see again, we talked about enrollment on August 29th, and we did list again those analyses. Again, during the September 12th of 2019, we again presented the analysis of boundary changes, the impacts on the facilities, and then any statutory requirements needed and the impact of repurposing of schools. We move into May of 2020, and that's when we did the updated demographic study. We looked at the change in enrollment again, and then that's when we had our demographer here to share with us. And I think what we all learned from that was that based on the trends over the past 10 years, the enrollment population ratio likely declined to about a 62% by 28-29. And we shared over the last couple of board meetings and study session that trajectory is on track. Again, in September 24th of 2020, we did the legal advice for possible sale of lease of the district property. Then in October, we came back and we updated Phase 3. We looked at the analysis of the boundaries. We looked at the analysis of sale and lease of land, formalized requests to school facility boards to replace schools, and then we did those analysis of boundary changes to optimize program services for general education students, and then we did the reanalysis of staffing models. That took us back through October again, and we looked at possible repurposing and closure of schools, and we looked at life of facility, program changes, statutory requirements, declining enrollment, and again, population density. Where in the future we were going to have the most student population. We get into November 12th of 2020. We look at Phase 3. We look at the updated demographic information, the boundaries, and again, building and repurpose enclosure. Whoops, I think I went too fast. And then December, again, boundary proposal, what would be our next steps? The analysis of transportation, possible staffing models, what would be a phased approach timeline to possible school closures and school repurposing, and then again, comprehensive staff and community communication plan to be developed. And that will be part of the discussion that we have this evening. Then again, we go into just a reminder of that average daily membership, where we are and where that trajectory is. It shows that can be seen in this graph. And I'm going to ask Mr. Berrigan, is there anything you'd like to add at this time?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, just as a reminder that figure of 10,813, that was based on the 100th day, and so we anticipated a 3% decrease for this year prior to the pandemic. And so knowing that, we did build the budget on 10,500 kids. However, because of the pandemic, we're getting paid on 8,063. So in an attempt to be proactive and anticipate a decrease in enrollment, we decreased that budget. Obviously, the pandemic decreased the funding portion of that, but what I want to be clear is that the downward decline was pre-pandemic. So I just want to emphasize that the proposal before you, while complicated by the pandemic from a funding level, has always been an issue from a decline perspective. The decline was always in our forecast pre-pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Berrigan. Again, here's the history and the enrollment, and you can see it just presented in a different way. Mr. Berrigan?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, I believe it was at the December 10th meeting where we had Rick Brammer here with Applied Economics, and in one of the conversations that we were having in preparation for the board presentation, he had made the comment that our enrollment this year is lower than what it was in the 95-96 school year. So really just look at the far left and look at what it is from his report.
Again, in the enrollment decline, as Mr. Berrigan said, it's always been in the forecast prior to the pandemic. The concerns were communicated. We started first communicating those back in 2016 when we started to see the decline in, I believe in 2016 is when the city of Glendale had the decline in birth rate. And then we began to look at other factors such as we know charter schools, but also we also know affordable housing was a concern for our families as well. Then the school's facilities board has GESD listed in the top 10 school districts that have lost ADM from one year to the next in the following reports. So June 15, 2020, June 15, 2019, June 15, 2018, and June 15, 2017. So again, this is another third party that has recognized that Glendale has a declining enrollment concern. Mr. Berrigan.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, while the superintendent has mentioned those various historical timelines, that is really a timeline since she began her superintendency. I do want to remind the board that prior to that, we did have Applied Economics present to the board even before the Superintendent Sagata-Jones was superintendent. So that information has been out there, and if you look in December of 2016, it was the revised budget in which we notified you that enrollment decline was becoming to be a concern.
So then we have again, when we look at Arizona Auditor General has indicated on the Classroom Dollars report the following: for fiscal year 2019, a decrease, fiscal year 2018, a large decrease, and then 2017, a moderate decrease. And within this link, can I hit that link? Or can Mr. Clark hit that link for us?
Madam Superintendent, if I may just provide some background on the link that we're about to present here.
There we go.
Madam Superintendent, members of the board, this is a report that became available in December of 2020. As some of you may know, several years ago, the Auditor General's Office started to, in that Classroom Dollars report, provide a financial stress indicator, and there's about 5 different categories in that metrics. What they released in December was showing school districts that had a decrease in their enrollment. And just, if you could just really, perhaps even write this, the 2 pieces of information, the 22.4, which is a decrease from 1 year. Perhaps write that down because I'm going to reference that a little bit later. And then 32.3. Per their analysis, the trend over the last 4 years has been 32.3. And I think when we sort that, of 104 districts that fall into this category, as you can see when I sorted it, we're on the top. That's probably not the right list to be number 1 on.
Can we get out of the link now, or is it going to take me out of the link? This is me clicking.
Do you want to close it out?
And close out the link. Yeah, just go back to the PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. All right, now the expenditure budget. Mr. Berrigan, one more time, please.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata Jones, this is a snapshot of what the Department of Education, through the Budget 25 report, indicated was that in M&O alone, they were reducing that budget by just shy of $11.4 million. We made some adjustments, but you can see what that net difference is in this fund alone. But in the beginning, that reduction was $11.4 million. This is specific to just the capital portion of our budget, and that was also a reduction of about $2.2 million. And so you've heard me say that for this year, at least based on January's information, that the Department of Ed reduced our budget by 13.5. So really, when you take the 2.2 and the figure that I referenced of 11.3, that's how we get to that $13.5 million figure. The purpose of this slide might be somewhat new, at least in the last couple of months. The document itself you would have seen in various presentations when we had updates in the beginning of the capital lawsuit, when we had a company that we use to document what our capital needs are. We realize that the data itself is very small, but what we wanted to do, and perhaps the focus is where it says years 1 through 5, the reason we believe this slide's important is because our needs are really greater than what we've asked our voters for. So in November of 2018, we asked our voters for bond authorization for $35 million. And if you recall, and if not, I'd point you to those prior presentations, we have always anticipated what our capital needs have been. And while we asked our voters for $35 million, we know that our need is greater. The reason it was $35 million and not more is simply because of the formula that goes behind that request, right? So as property values go up and as you pay down your debt, your borrowing power grows. And at the time that we went to the voters, it was only 35. And so we asked our voters for what we could, which was the $35 million, but truly to address our needs. And if you just look over the next 30 years, that's what it looks like. This information, while this is the revised information, the previous version has been provided to our attorneys as we navigate this capital lawsuit, because the state needs to understand what our needs are. And so we just wanted to really highlight that while we asked our voters for $35 million, and we're very appreciative of that and for their continued support, the need has always been greater than the 35 that we've asked for. In the Auditor General's link that we showed you, I asked, can you just write down that first slide, that first column, and I think it was 22.4. Now, they're, without overcomplicating it, they take the total weighted student count. We simply take ADM, which is a little simpler formula, but we calculated the decrease in ADM of 23.21, and I think it was 22.4 if my memory serves me correctly. So, you're within 1% of accuracy. So they've identified that the enrollment has decreased. We're within 1% or whatever that difference is. When you look at the reduction of that $13.5 million, percentage-wise, you're about 22% if I'm rounding. And I just really want you to think about, and not perhaps just the board, but perhaps our community, to think about what would happen if you lost 22% of your paycheck. How do you then balance the various bills that we all have? In an attempt to give you an idea of what the projected deficit could be next year, we did make some assumptions. When the revenue control limit decreases because of a lower attendance or enrollment or ADM, you're automatically going to lose revenue. And the first big revenue source is the M&O override. So if you were to look at our budget, I'm going to round it to $9.4 million. Next year, because prior year funding is used for the purpose of the override, you're looking at about $7.3 million, 7.4. So you can see that difference. As we get closer to having a final count of the 100th day and reconciling the ADM, obviously we'll revise those numbers. But again, we just want to continue to emphasize that the decrease in revenue based on the information that we knew at the time that this was done. If you look at Classroom Site Fund, I believe statutorily the JLBC has to provide the per pupil amount by March 1st. Again, for the purpose of this analysis, we just said, what if it just stayed flat? And you can just see that same approach was taken in those other two categories. In the district additional assistance, we did assume that there was going to be the restoration of DAA. An instructional improvement fund, to give you an idea, an overview, and to simplify that, we made some assumptions in about $110,000. So again, information will change as we get closer to additional information becoming available, whether it's from the legislature, JLBC. We'll refine these numbers and get you an updated figure. I will say that the Department of Education, and I believe I provided you all this last week, there's the Budge 25, and that's an independent document report done by the Department of Ed. In the latest report, which I think is dated January 29th, the $13.5 million that I just referenced, they actually have it closer to $14 million, so 13.9 something. But my point is that in their latest report, the shortfall is closer to 14 this year. So my guess is that information will change as the 100th day becomes available.
On this particular slide, we're looking at the actual projected enrollment by school, and then this again shows that trajectory of where we would be. So we are going to show you several different slides that will show what we look to propose. Should there be possible school closures, then what does that enrollment look like? You had also asked us some of those questions about capacity, and so we'll have those conversations and look at that data as well. Mr. Berrigan. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to go back.
Yeah. Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, this slide should be familiar to you. It's something that Mr. Bramer has provided or has shown in the past. We felt that this document is important to bring understanding on the rationale so that you, as those who have been elected by your community, can have the information when questions surface about Board Member Pimentel. I think it was your question, I believe, at the last meeting of, why was I'm selected? And while there are many factors into that recommendation, if you just look at IMES, and if you look at actual, which is the far left column, of 542, and if you just take that straight across all the way to the 28-29 school year, the enrollment pre-pandemic is expected to be 388. If you look at sign, in 2014, 673, and again, just go to your far right, 388 as well. And again, pre-pandemic data. I'll take it to Coyote Ridge, 918 in 2014. I want to make sure that as we go through these numbers, I would hope that you also reflect, that we all reflect on the information and the comments that we've heard. Coyote Ridge has declined, I believe, every year from 2014 to 2020. I can't see that far, so please excuse me. But when you look at Coyote Ridge from 2014 to where it would be in 28-29, you can see that decrease. Now, as you heard in the past and as you're going to hear again today, there are variable factors that went into that recommendation. And one important factor for Coyote Ridge, where it's physically located and the access that the community could have to that site. So the recommendations, the information that you've been presented has all been data-driven. This other slide, again, should not be new. Mr. Bramer has provided this slide in the past. Obviously, with different presentations, the number might have changed. But one of the key factors in that demographic study is the decline in birth rates. And when there is a sluggish economy, historically, data has shown that birth rates decrease. Part of the recommendation to also, in addition to just academic benefits, but also the reconfiguration of that K3-4-8 model also has to do with that projected decrease in those grade levels in future years. So if you're going to decrease in one, whether it's a K3 or 4-8, you know that at some point those class sizes, that enrollment's going to be low or lower than what we have experienced in the past. And in order to be more financially efficient, operationally efficient, it also makes sense to combine those, in addition to the benefits that Dr. Peterson and Kornbaya has already mentioned in the past, and I'm sure you'll even hear again today. So again, to look at these solutions or recommendations because of one variable, that's not the approach that was taken. There were a lot of variables that were taken, data-driven approach for those recommendations.
I think also we did hear Mr. Bramer tell us that because of the pandemic, that some economists believe that there could be an increase in birth rates. However, the latest research shows and data shows that actually it has dipped as well. So they don't anticipate that to be an increase in birth rates. Here we have, this will be a new slide for you. So it's the projected attendance area based on proposal rollover methodology. So this is where we're looking at each school, the capacity without portable buildings, and then we look at phase 1 and 2022, what it would do to the number of students, and then in 22-23 in phase 2, what those student populations are. We did purposely put zeros in phase 2 because in phase 2, if phase 1 occurs and then phase 2, those schools would not be there. So that's what you see there. So you can look where we look at capacity, 1260. Let's just pick one landmark as 1260. You go into phase 1, and that is with phase 1 being implemented. You have 885 students, and then with phase 2, 859 students. And you can see that all the way down. I want to look at Sunset Vista. Sunset Vista, you see in Phase 1 is 323, and then it goes to 621. That's because in Phase 2, that's when, if Phase 2 occurs, and that's where you see the change in the other school closures. In addition, though, if you'll look at Sunset Vista at 323, that number actually be projected higher. We are currently, as we always do every year, we look at program services for our children with special needs, and there will be some shifts to that school, so that number will be higher than that. But why you see the difference from Phase 1 to Phase 2 is because of how Phase 2 affects Phase 1, or Phase 1 affects Phase 2, both ways, I guess. Or did somebody else have a comment? Mr. Bergen?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Scott-Jones, what I would like for everyone to be mindful of is the balance of really trying to accomplish two things: making decisions based on the demographic study, which again was pre-pandemic, but also when you start to look at, and I think the superintendent mentioned this at the last meeting, is where it's February, we're going into March, and we have to start beginning planning for next year. And typically what we start to do about now is meet with every school site about what their FTEs or teachers are going to be. And so we need to, the reason for this is current students being rolled over. That's why it's called the rollover methodology, is we're taking everyone who was in first grade into second, and then we kind of backfilled kindergarten, because you never know what that is, right? Because they're new kids coming into the system. Just for the purpose of trying to understand what it would look like for next year, you take those kindergartners, first graders that were first graders, and then you put them into kindergarten, so that gives you an idea of what that enrollment might be. And so it gives you an idea, as far as capacity, where we would be in either of those phases. So if you just look at, take Glendale, if you take Challenger, the capacity is 1410. By the time this rollover or the Phase 2 would be implemented, should you choose to do that, you can see that there's still room to accommodate students.
Here was the 2021 class size numbers, and this is just letting you know by grade level exactly what the standard classroom size is for GESD and the current number of students and the current number of classrooms. And you can just glance at that real quick. I think Ms. Valadez would like to explain how this is presented to you. Ms. Valadez.
Good afternoon, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones. So if you'll just take a look at the middle column, I'll just go through a couple there as an example. So you can see third grade, our classroom standard in the district, our size is 27. So what that is telling us is a number of students. So right now this year we have 16 classrooms that have 14 to 19 students in them. We have 19 classrooms in third grade that have 20 to 25 students in them. We have 2 classrooms that have 26 or 27 students in them, and we have 2 classrooms over the standard of 27. So they have 28 or more. Fourth grade, if you take a look, the standard is 31. We have 12 classrooms with 15 to 20 students in them, 22 classrooms with 21 to 26 students in them, and 4 classrooms with 27 to 28. As you can see, that the largest fourth grade classroom in the district right now is sitting at either 27 or 28 students. And then that's how the rest of the grade levels read. So you can see where we're currently sitting at as far as grade levels at this point in time, which overall, just to give you an idea, out of 356 classrooms, we have 340 classrooms that are at the standard or below. Just for your information, previous year, pre-COVID, we had 387 total classrooms, and we had 309 classrooms sitting at the standard or lower, just so you have a comparison. Thank you.
Mr. Berrigan.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, this is just really a projection of what we think is going to be the deficit, or the decrease in revenue for next year. And again, this is a projection. As information becomes available, we'll update this slide.
So this gets us again to the phase one, the proposed closures, again, Imes and Sign. The Imes students, it shows where they go to Burton, Landmark, and Smith, and then Sign goes to Burton and Horizon. And then proposed boundary changes are there. Phase two, proposed closure and repurposing would be Coyote Ridge, Desert Garden, Bicentennial North. And it shows where each of those students would go to. We talked again about Desert Garden being repurposed. And we talked again about Coyote Ridge being repurposed. In phase two, we talked about students are being reassigned based on the grids. Jack would be configured to a K-8. Menzendick is reconfigured to a K-8. Again, that was based on student density. Here we go back to our grids, just as you've seen where kids would be moving to. And then the grid codes, we'll talk about that in a minute. I want to make sure on the phases and the repurposing, again, we've talked about Desert Garden again to put, our recommendation is a preschool there, a comprehensive preschool program there, and that building is conducive to that. And then again, Coyote Ridge, we talked about the systems of care. That building is conducive to that and gives easy access for the entire district to do that. So those are the reasons for the repurposing of those. Grid code, are we going to be able to hit that link or?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagada-Jones, this was just to give parents an idea or anyone who lived in the community. It's already up there. We're happy to click on that again, but it just kind of shows you if you live in this grid where your phase one or phase two impact would be. We're happy to go through that, but just to remind you, it's really for those parents that have students in our schools, how that proposal could impact you.
And that's been posted already, so. Oh, I'm sorry. Then we go into, we talked about phase one and phase two to optimize efficiencies by conducting cost analysis to pursue. We looked at, as we said, life of facility, program changes, statutory requirements, declining enrollment, student density. Again, we shared this, the preschool, what we would do for wraparound services there. This allows us to do that. Again, due to the space, the location, the layout. Then again, Coyote Ridge as GSD System of Care Center. We talk about what that would be. The series of services supports a focus around a medical clinic. And we shared all that before with you, what we could offer for our families. Complete wraparound services, again with clinical and social workers and counselors. Then we get into, again, the rationale we said, the location, the space, the campus layout. We really believe that we would want our parents to be able to go to one location to receive each of those types of services. We talked about, again, even how we do our food distributions, that everything would be housed in the one location so we could truly have complete wraparound services. We believe as we talked about, it's easy access to Coyote Ridge. It's not within a neighborhood. It has a great, we could have public transportation routes there, and it would be where people would feel they could go to receive any type of service. Again, the framework again, all the services we talked about, from mental health all the way down to recreational services and juvenile justice services, and those would be with partnerships. Again, this, we've already begun some of this work just at our local sites, and again, this is through the grant fundings that we've received. Same. Next, we get to geo-learning and the 21-22 school year, so I'll turn that over to Dr. Peterson and Carvalho.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata Jones, as was mentioned at the last study session, that there'd be no the recommendation would be that GEO learning stays as is with K-8 model, as it is our unit 118, our school 118, and but then any kinds of programmatic changes would come at a later time once we figure out success of the program and if anything would need to change programmatically for next year, but the organization of it would stay the same for next year.
The next thing we looked at, based on phase 1 and phase 2, would be the staffing model criteria, size of student population, innovations, eliminating the academic achievement gap, sales support, and equal access to related arts. And then again, this is just a draft of small, medium, of large schools, and then we would have to determine what those are. So that's still in draft form. Here we talked again about, we shared with you just policy for GCQA, if there would be a need for reduction in force. So that's just the policy that was shared. Same policies. Then again, it brings us to to have the conversation this evening about the school closure timeline. So the special board meeting took place last week on February 4th. February 10th, the public hearing notices to be received in homes, and I know we've had people receive them in home. So hopefully everybody got their notices. That's somewhat out of control once we send them and give them to the post office, but we met all the timelines that we were to meet. And then on February 25th, the public hearing for boundary changes we want to talk about, and then March 11th, the second meeting regarding boundary changes, school closures, and repurposing, and possible action taken by the board. We'll talk about that on February 25th. I just want to remind us for a public hearing for boundary changes, that would be here at 5:30. What the planning is because we are still in the pandemic, we still have to pay attention to what the executive order says about crowd size and everything. We are still going to be 6 feet apart, so it'll be set up like this. We will bring people into the boardroom in probably groups of 3. They will have 3 minutes to let us know their concerns. There is no dialogue. That's strictly a public hearing, like we said before. To make sure that we're accommodating everybody, we will have monitors outside, and they will be able to not only see what's happening in here, but they will also be able to hear everything so as they wait their turn for that. So we will begin that at 5:30, and we will listen to any public concerns from then. In between, we talked about last time, and that's why we wanted to have the study session this evening, is be able to present to those schools affected in phase 1 and phase 2, present to them particularly the rationales behind their schools, and then that also gives us a question as the executive team to answer questions that the public may have specific to their schools. So we did create that for you, and we'll share that with you. And that is just, our best thinking at this time. And then March 11th, then we go into, that's a normal board meeting, and that's where the recommendation will come regarding boundary changes and school closures as well. So the proposed community engagement meetings, we looked at March 1st at 5 p.m. at North, March 2nd at Desert Garden, March 4th at Cody Ridge, March 8th at Sign, and March 9th at Imes. The reason we decided to conduct those at their home schools was simply so that the community would not be, they would not be able not to attend because it was somewhere where they didn't have transportation. We wanted it to be in their home school setting so that they would have easy access to that, and we would avoid anybody that couldn't get to another location. Again, the same process in our mind is what we would be thinking is we would do a presentation, we would have locations within the site, and we'll have to have, and we'll have conversations with our building level administrators, but we would have for example, if we did a cafeteria or a gym, then we would have as many as we could in that. We'd do the presentation, answer questions, and then we'd bring in the next group so that everybody has an opportunity to hear a very short presentation, but also then the opportunity to ask any other questions. Meanwhile, we've been trying, we've posted, I believe it's up there today as well, is the frequently asked questions that we've had come to us. So we've done that. Also, from the February 25th public hearing, we assume there'll be a lot of comments and questions. We will capture those questions so that we can also get those posted as well, and so that people have if there's even further questions when we come to these dates, they would be able to do that. So that's what we're thinking about the process for that. We would want to get notifications out to our community as quickly as possible, as well as we want to make sure that it is done in both, in particular Spanish and English to get to our communities. Both for the February 25th public hearing, we will have an interpreter here, so that if we have a language other than English, in particular Spanish, we do have the next population language that we would look at would be Arabic, and we will work to get someone here for that as well. And then depending on the site, we can pull by grids what languages there are. In particular, again, we would focus on English, Spanish, and Arabic, okay? So that's kind of what the proposed, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to that. Those are kind of our thoughts on what we could do. We really would like it to be at-home schools so that anybody within there can do that. And that would be for those that live in that homeschool area that's affecting them. I do want to state, and I think we've stated that, and it states that on the postcard, when we get to February 25th for the public hearing, that is really to hear from those that are affected within the resident, okay? So that's important to know. And then when we get to this, it would be for those that are affected by their own homeschool, and to be able to answer those questions. So those are that's what we're thinking. We tried to choose dates. We didn't want to do dates back to back because we didn't put an end time. You notice there's not an end time. We don't want to put an end time. We want to be able to hear what the community has, and we want to make sure that they're informed and they have all their questions answered. So that's why you do not see an end time on those. Okay, that concludes the presentation. I know it was lengthy, but some of it we've seen before, but I think it's important that we always go back to that. But at this time, then we can answer any questions that you have, questions about timelines, your thoughts on that. We will make sure and do everything we can to follow what we can to keep everybody safe, since we are still in that. We will do our 6 feet apart. We will make sure that when they come in for this particular 25th hearing, that they come to the podium. We will sanitize in between. We'll make sure they're lined up 6 feet apart and do that because we want our community to remain safe. The same thing will occur at the sites as well, and we'll just have to think about what that looks like when we bring groups in as well.
Okay. At this time, do any board members have any questions?
I have some questions. Going back to page 10 of the presentation, in suggesting to the community that I've spoken to look at this, one thing that has been brought to my attention.
I'm sorry, Board Member Pimentel, tell me when I get to 10, okay?
It is the average daily membership graph.
Okay. It's enrollment, projected.
When you see history, go one more.
Yeah.
Keep going. One more.
One more, there we go.
There you go. This is a concern that's been brought to me several times. and it's a visual thing. So when we look at the current number of 8,063, what has been brought to me quite often by community is, why is that bar so short? And shouldn't it be almost as tall as the 9,005 for the 2029 school year? It is perceived to be something that is, I'm trying to think of the proper word here, not honest. And this is something that's been brought to me a lot, so I just wanted to bring it to your attention, that the bar should be taller.
We're happy to answer that. Mr. Berrigan?
Madam President, members of the board, Board Member Pimentel, would you just elaborate of specifically what's not genuine about that 8,063 number?
Sure. So if you look at the number prior, where it says the 2021 budget, it's 10,500.
Right.
And then if you look at the bar next to it where it says 8,063, it's less than half of that number. So visually, when the community is looking at it, they've asked me, why is that bar so short? That number looks like it should be under 4,000. So it's just the visual of the bar.
I'm not sure that I understand necessarily the question. Maybe perhaps let me attempt to answer it this way. The 8,063 is a number that is actually provided by the Department of Ed. And if you recall on Friday's board memo, I gave you a copy of that. And so simply the answer is, whatever people perceive, we can't control that. I can only tell you that the Department of Education is paying us, at the time that this was put together, based on 8,063 students. The Enrollment Stabilization Grant, which was an initiative by the governor, was meant to provide school districts financial security, if you will, when it comes to the pandemic. And so basically, and let me just kind of remind everyone that what he said was, we understand that there's a pandemic, and what we want to do is provide everyone with financial stability. We're going to give you, through this grant, the greater of current year funding or prior year funding up to, I believe it was 98%, if I remember correctly. That didn't play out that way. And so not only did our school district get hurt by it, but others as well. And so I'm happy to provide you, and I think I've done that in the board memo, that we're getting paid on 8,063, which is the result of that $13.5 million deficit. You know, if it was up to me to make these numbers, I'd have it at the highest point of 1353 and everything would be great. But that's not our reality. And so while we don't like the information, I do think that we have to understand the brutal facts of our current situation. And so I would point to you, to anyone of the public, where that number is coming from. I would point them to the Arizona Department of Education's ADMS 46 report.
Thank you, but it's I apologize for cutting you off. It's the visual of how short the actual bar is, not the number.
Can I try to explain?
Please.
Okay, so I had the same question you did last week, and I looked at it. The problem is the y-axis of this graph does not start at 0. So when it's chopped off like that, you see this huge gap in there. So if you look at the space between 2016 and 2020, which had a decline of 2,300 students, it is about equal to the amount of space between 2020 and 2021. So space-wise, just a different. It looks funky because the y-axis doesn't start at 0. It probably starts at like 7,000 or something. So everything looks skewed. But I sat there with a piece of paper and I was measuring the bars last board meeting because it looked funny to me too.
So it was a visual presentation.
Madam President, really the issue is the scale.
Yes.
Correct.
And we're happy to adjust that. At the end of the day, the data doesn't change. There's almost 2,463 students less, and there's a $13.5 million deficit. While I apologize for not having that to scale, it doesn't change the fact that the bigger visual that we should be concerned about is a $13.5 million deficit.
Thank you.
Can I add something on to this slide also? If you look at that slide and you look at the current state and it says 8,063, and then you go to 2022 and it's up to 200. I mean, has our demographer been able to adjust that 10,000 to a more realistic number or not? Or is that really what we're expecting in the 2022 school year?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Scott-Jones, Member Smith, if I understand your question correctly, you're looking at the 2022 data really through 29, is that correct?
Really, I'm just looking at 2022. We're saying that we're going to jump from 8,000 during this pandemic, and then we're going to jump up to 10,200 following year.
No, Madam President, members of the board, Member Smith, let me try to explain the slide maybe a little bit more better. So I apologize for the confusion that may have been caused. 2001 through 2020 is actual ADM, and again, those numbers you can verify that through the Department of Education. The 10,500, the logic between that, let me just maybe walk you through the logic and you can tell me if that helps or not. 10,813 was our Group A 100th day for prior year. We projected, based on the demographic study, I think they had it at 2.9, I rounded to 3%, so I just took 3% less to build this year's budget. What I'm trying to demonstrate in this slide is that we built the budget at 10,500, but in reality, we're only being funded, again, at the time that this was put together, 8,063. 2022 and 2023, it's not that we project the increase. What we should have included on there was, this was the projection prior to the pandemic based on the trend. So let me just explain this, and hopefully it doesn't confuse you. Remember that, and I think the example that I used is if you have students, kindergarten is the easy one, and it's probably the easiest one to tell. If you have 30 students, kindergartner, as you're teaching, you see 30 kids. But when I see the report, I see 15, because remember that the state only funds students at half. So while in your classroom you see 30, I see 15, right? So just kind of keep that in mind as well. But what we do is we take that 100th day, and then we just applied the percentage identified in the demographic study to give us an idea of what funding would be in future years. So 2022 through 29 really is data based on the pandemic, is data based on the demographic study. The concern that was mentioned at the last meeting was, yes, we're currently getting funded at 8,063. Next year will be very telling. Next year's information will allow us to reevaluate and reassess what those next 9 years are going to look like. The question and the concern that I would have is, what if that trajectory is accelerated? That's the concern. Board Member Smith, I don't know if I answered your question, but that was my attempt to.
I think it's a good explanation of how these numbers are there and the funding. And I would think that as we go forward, that we need to be aware that we may not be funded at the 10-2
right.
in our future planning, and so that's a concern also as we're making our decisions on why we're closing schools, because we don't know what we're going to be funded at. But it's the current year funding that really is an issue for us.
That is correct, Board Member Smith.
We share that same concern, Board Member Smith.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes, I have another question. I was looking at the new boundaries on page 29, and you could look at either 28 or 29 with the arrows or without the arrows. Probably with the arrows is more helpful. There you go. And having been to Smith, I know that it's right on, is that Maryland? It's right on Maryland. And there's going to be kids who can't walk right across the street to go to their school, is the way it looks here. Are the numbers so great in section NE, and I think I can go look at that myself probably, where it wouldn't be a factor in sending kids to Smith instead of Challenger?
Right.
Yeah.
NE would be crossing 67.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Annie already goes to Challenger, right? Am I reading that color right?
Yeah, but they would go to Men's and Dick
Men's
or
and Dick.
Jack.
Can I?
Oh, Mr. Bergen.
Sorry, Madam President, members of the board, Board Member Pimentel, can I just check for understanding? Is the question, why can't students in NA go to Challenger? Is that the question?
No, it looks like that's going to be the boundary change, correct? NE will go to Challenger. But if you're in NE and you're right there on the south side of Maryland, and Smith is just on the north side of Maryland, and I'm a parent that has a child that can currently just walk across the street to go to Smith, like say, is that 63rd Maryland, that can walk across the street and go to Smith, and now they're being sent to, and I apologize, I don't know what the current boundary is there.
Looks like NE currently
back
goes
and
to,
forth.
Yeah, I need to go back
Put
to
in
it
a
to see the
Challenger.
boundary.
So I don't know if the families in NE currently go to Challenger or where they go. But it seems that it's just right on a boundary.
Yeah, it's the change in the other K8.
I think Dr. Peterson might be, you want to answer
It's-
that? Go for it.
Yeah, it's because, go ahead.
Madam President, members of the board, Member Pimentel, my conjecture, without knowing who this specific person is or the parent, is currently their home school is Challenger.
Okay.
However, if they are going to Smith, it must be an open enrollment
Okay.
to Smith, and then open enrollments would continue even with boundary changes. That open enrollment
So currently
process.
NE is part of Challenger already?
Correct.
Yes,
Okay, then my
that's
question
probably
is
why.
moot. I apologize. And then I have a question about the system of care.
Just, I want to go back to that, the Board Member Pimentel, because that will be important, just so, remember, we have the grid that actually, which is nice, that anybody can see where their current, where they currently reside, and then where their current school would be. So we'll make sure that that's clear for parents as well to do that. And I think that's already posted on there as well, but thank you.
Thank you, yes. And that was just my question, just
No,
Looking at-
absolutely.
at the map. Going on to page 38 and 39 of for the system of care.
Am I on 38?
One question I've been asked, and I probably don't answer as well as I would like to, is if we can't keep Coyote Ridge open for students, how are we going to open a system of care? And I think I have a very basic grasp of the answer, but if that's something that we can touch on a little bit
Yeah, I
today.
can answer that, and I can have Dr. Lafitte chime in as well. The system of care is not based on student enrollment or students coming. That's a system of care for all families and students within the district. So it wouldn't be based, keeping that open is because you're now providing all these services to everybody within the community. It's not tied directly to a student enrollment number, if that's the question, Dr. Lafitte. I think that's the question, correct?
It is the question.
Okay.
It's how are we going to fund this?
The same way we fund these services. Some of these services we already have, it's grant funded. So that would be the majority of the services. And then again, Dr. Lafitte talked about at the last time, the partnerships as well that do that. So that's how that's funded, yes.
Thank you. That's pretty much the way I've been answering it.
Great.
And I think it's wonderful that it's a little bit more clear today.
And remember, we have those particular grants in which we need to provide those services, so yes.
And I think my last question is on page 43. Again, we have the school site staffing model.
Where's 43? Yes.
Do we have a definition of what is small, what is medium, and what is large?
We have not looked at that, Ms. Pimentel. We have not determined that. What the conversation came of is knowing when we looked at the different demographics and what the student populations would be at sites was we knew that we would run from a small, medium, and large. And so really the question was, regardless of small, medium, and large, what, first of all, were the services we wanted everybody to have. Just because you're a large school or just because you're a small school doesn't mean you need those same services. It's going to depend on the needs of your particular population at that site. But as far as small, medium, large, we've not looked at that. We haven't looked into depth of what that would look like. But that would be, again, our next steps, yes.
Okay, and I apologize. I do have one more question. Going back to the slide, page 21, we are looking at the schools in phase 1 and the numbers that they will have.
I'm trying to get there.
Next one. There you go.
There we go.
And in looking at Bicentennial North and South, for example, it shows, and I apologize, I did not add this up. So in the phase 1, it shows that Bicentennial North has 547, South has 409, which takes us to 956. And then the following year at Bicentennial South, okay, well, the math, or 956. So the following year in phase 2, 2022, once Bicentennial North is closed, we show that Bicentennial South will have 851 with a loss of about 105 students. Is that how accurate? Wow, okay.
But you also lost one of the current boundary grids. So like that little one from Challenger,
Right.
the immediate one below that, still within that square mile of Smith, would be going into that Jack and Menzendick configuration. So that's part of why that would be different.
Okay.
Mr. Peterson, Dr. Peterson, did you want to say something?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, one of the other compounding factors is that our 8th grade numbers are so much higher than our kindergarten numbers coming in.
Okay.
So when a larger 8th grade group leaves, that's going to create a bigger gap when your kindergarten group is not at that same number.
Same number.
For enrollment reasons.
Yeah. And we see that. I mean, that's what we currently see right now anyway. So.
It just seems like such an incredibly huge gap. But that's what we're saying.
I had a question regarding that same slide. And the numbers for the Bi-Sci South, the capacity was 870. And then the projection, in the phase 2, we have 861. And it's pretty close to capacity there, and I would hate us to have to change boundaries again, in the near future because we're so close. So what's the conversation been about Bi-Sci South and those numbers?
Yes, Madam President, members of the board. Board Member Smith, we would not propose changing boundaries again if there had to be additional buildings or reconstructing there. That would be the approach we do. Mr. Berrigan?
Yeah, Madam President, members of the board, Member Smith, and really, let me, if I may, just elaborate on that. This also, because we wanted to kind of give you a worst case scenario, this does take GEO kids into consideration. So we do believe that these numbers would decrease depending on how and what GEO looks like. So we wanted to give you kind of that as well. Like, if every kid within their grid went to their school, this is what you'd be looking at from a rollover method, right? Methodology. There will be kids or students that will enroll in GEO, and so you're going to see those numbers decrease. However, if capacity becomes problematic, which I wouldn't say it's a problem, it means that we're moving in the right direction. But we also do have money in the bond that we specifically identified to address these issues. And the recommendation of doing a phase 1 and phase 2 is to allow time to accommodate those facilities for that K-8 model.
Yes.
I have a question. For those sites that are moving into more of a wraparound service, and I'll use Coyote Ridge as an example, I understand that a lot of the people that will be staffing that facility will be from other sites throughout the district, or are we talking about Coyote Ridge people staying and then adapting to a new sort of a new job at that point? I'm just curious as to, is there anybody is there anyone at Coyote Ridge that will end up staying at Coyote Ridge, or do we end up shuffling them out and then moving different specialized staff in?
Again, it's not based on servicing a student as a school, operating as a school, it's a wraparound services. So teaching staff would not be there. Teaching staff would, be not at Coyote Ridge teaching kids, so no, teaching staff would not remain there. As far as the delivery of programs, that's really, for example, we have some programs that we would shift over which already have people in those positions. And then when your partnerships, you would have staff within those partnerships that already are there. Mr. Lafitte, you want to comment on that, I'm sure.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Board Member Martinez, Superintendent Sagata-Jones is absolutely correct. What would happen in this case is, think of it as the partnership. So an example, Touchstone is a partner. We would shift them over, and we would allow them to use our facilities for housing to support students and adults, depending on the scenario, with their mental health needs. We'd work with other partners to house them. In terms of our own staff, it will be those staff that provide services district-wide, as mentioned earlier. So an example, we have district social workers. We would shift them, and they would be housed there as a unit. And so it would be that. In terms of current staff there, they would be moved to other sites around the district in their respective roles.
Okay, thank you.
Based on the need.
So almost like one of those medical facilities where different offices are all there doing different services. They're just at one location.
That would be our hope, yes. Okay. A lot of these services we provide already, they're just at different locations.
Okay. And then I have a question regarding your proposed meetings at the sites. Are we not interacting with people that will be impacted by phase 2 at this time? Because we have a lot of campuses that also are impacted by boundary changes.
That takes place during the public hearing.
So we're not going to offer opportunities for them at their home schools?
At their home schools, give me an example. You mean Jack Men's?
Yes.
That shifts to a K-8. They're not really, it's just it goes to a K-8 model, and of course there's students coming in that way. So we didn't plan to present at a Jack Men's for boundary changes for that.
Because really we're talking about almost our entire district has some level of shift.
And that's what we are meeting the statutory requirement by having the public hearing on February 25th. Our focus for the community is so that we can really address those questions that they may have because of phase 1, phase 2. Boundaries, we just need to do the public meeting through those comments, and we would be able to take those and put on our frequently asked questions and then address those that way.
Now, at these particular meetings, will it present kind of an overview of the entire, here's phase 1, here's phase 2, here are the upcoming changes? That way, if any parent from those other schools happens to go to one of those meetings, they're going to be able to get that information and ask questions at that time?
We'll have a presentation that explains phase 1 and phase 2, yes.
Okay. And then are we going to include our social media platform to help direct our families to the website, our community to the website?
Yes,
you've got
absolutely.
incoming families that may not be aware yet.
Yes, we will. We have, we always will send out, as we do with notifications to family, with the emails that we have that are current. Our administrators will work with their staffs as well to get that out. We'll use social media as well. We will use radio broadcasting as well. We'll do all those things so that everybody knows. That's why we want to get the timeline out quickly so that people can see when those are, and then we can plan from there.
Okay. And then can we have a simple presentation that's done both in like English and Spanish that we can put up on social media so we can direct people to the website if they have more questions?
The presentation can be translated into another language.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I do have one more question. Apparently, I'm full of them tonight. On slide 45, with regards to the reduction in force, 44, I apologize. I know that I believe the number was 165 staff. We generally have turnover every year, if I remember the number correctly, due to various reasons, retirement, moving, different reasons. Will there possibly, has it been considered to offer an early termination, early retirement package to possibly avoid a reduction in force?
We have not, again, that takes money, but we have not addressed that, no.
Would you say that the average loss of teachers is, how many did you say per year average?
So last year we hired 160 certified positions just last year. And then in January, with our intent to return, we had over 60, but we had just, speaking of teachers, we had 47 teachers that already have resigned their positions for the following school year, going in as it is. And then when contracts go out, we gave contracts to appropriately certified staff. At this point in time, we have other staff under other types of certificates, so we are waiting for that as a new phase. So only appropriately certified staff are getting the first go-around of contracts.
Thank you.
Okay, to piggyback on that, and you may not have the answer, but how many of our classrooms, because I know we've struggled with finding certified teachers, so how many are, either...
That's the appropriately certified numbers, yes, Ms. Valdez.
We have 59 that are not appropriately certified that we are holding off on issuing contracts to.
And then do we know how many long-term subs that we've...
Long-term vacancies, most of our long-term subs are contracted people, and I don't have the number offhand, are in our special ed positions. That is where the majority of our long-term or contracted positions are, is getting certified special ed teachers.
So that would also kind of absorb some of those positions.
Right, so they automatically, if they're contracted, we do not. That's always our last resort, is to hire the contracted people.
We absolutely try to get the appropriately certified. Other questions?
I think I have one more. On page 22, this is with regard to the class size numbers. So it looks like we have 12, 13, maybe 15 classrooms that are over the standard size, which out of, I apologize, I don't remember the number.
356.
356, that's not bad. Can we anticipate these numbers, if we go ahead and if 5 schools are closed, can we anticipate that these numbers are still going to be looking like this? Or would they be, let me take that back. Can we still anticipate that we will have classroom sizes still at standard at the same ratio?
Ms. Valdez, I'll let you answer. But
our goal is to staff at the standard. That is the goal as far as being financially responsible. With that, it's always the standard. Obviously, you can see we're under the standard. But our goal is to always staff at the standard, to get it as close to that standard as possible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Do we have any more questions at this time?
I had a few things I wanted in the future. In our presentations that we've seen, I haven't seen numbers about students that are affected. Can I get a report about how many students are being affected by all of these changes?
The students that are affected by moving from site to site as well as, is that the question, Ms. Smith?
Yeah, site to site, the closing of school, just so I can see the numbers of
Sure.
what we're doing if we vote for something. How many children are being affected by our vote?
Yes.
And then one other thing was, I don't remember which page, but it's up in the beginning where you have the cost breakdown where it talks about the 17 million shortfall. And I really feel like we should have some more information that explains how much we're saving by closing the school and whatever else could be there in a simple form. I would say, if we're short 11 million, but then we're showing that these SGs and these ESSERs are giving us to a zero balance. And that was like for 11 million, and if we're still 6 million high, I would like to have something simple up there that says, okay, this new school year, like we're still shy, it's a $6 million deficit, closing school A, closing school B is going to save us this amount of money, and so that we can, as a community, understand, where this savings comes from. So if someone comes up and says, well, why don't you get rid of administration? Well, okay, we're going to say administration, this is hypothetical numbers. It's like, if we get rid of administration, it's going to save us $100,000. It's going to save us $2 million. It's really the visual that helps people understand why you have to close the school and how it helps us have a financially solvent.
Board Member Smith, we apologize. It was really hard to hear some of that. Could you make sure that gets to Ms. Powell in writing so that we understand what is that? I think one of the, I'm sorry, it was difficult to hear, but I understand what the savings would be if you started eliminating positions. And then also we had shared, I don't know if that was the question I thought I heard was the average cost of closing a school, the savings is about 2.9 million. So, and then you're asking what it would be if you removed one category, if you removed all administrators, how much that would be. And past that, I didn't understand the rest of the question. We had a hard time hearing, unfortunately, but if you can get those to us so we can at least then ask clarifying questions, that would help us.
I'll do that.
Thank you.
And then I would ask if we can possibly, because we know that this is going to cause a change and everybody feels it as a negative, but I think it's really important if we can also point out some of the positives. What are the positive things that are going to be able to happen that we can do for the students that maybe we haven't been able to do? If the services are improved, if specials are more consistent, if sports are more available, those kinds of things that, because we're looking on we need to cut millions of dollars, but we also need to show where this can be a positive thing for our kids and our families. I mean, no matter what, we know it's going to be an impact, but we need to show where there's also a bright side to this.
Thank you. Board Member Bartels.
I have one more question. In my neighborhood, I know there's a new housing development going up, and I've been told that there's new homes going up by American, which I'm not sure
Yes.
about that.
Yes. It's the
And I
golf
don't
course.
know how those projections come into play ever.
Yes, we can address that. We're aware of it's the Glen Oaks Golf Course, and then we can look at, also we'll address the other one, I'll let Mr. Berrigan, but also remember, you have to make sure those new housing are going up within our district boundaries in particular, but we do have information on those as well as the Glen Oaks Golf Course, and Mr. Berrigan.
Madam President, members of the board, when Rick Bramer was here and has done throughout the years, not just the last 3, but really at least during my tenure here, in that demographic study, it talks about what he refers to as the capture rate. And you might have heard me in some of the previous study sessions that we've had, what goes into that. And so look, I'm going to truly just simplify it. I hope that gets the message across. We can just use that development as an example. And we're going to go with 200 because I think that was the number that I heard, whether they're homes, units, or whatever they may be. And again, I'm oversimplifying this.
I'm sorry, Mr. Berrigan, just to clarify, we're talking about the property that's near Apollo High School, American and Horizon, correct?
I believe it's right
Yes.
at 55th and Northern, if
Yes.
I understand correctly. But even if it wasn't, just the whole concept, I think my hope is that you take away from this is they're building 200 homes. We assume that every home has a 0.5 student that is eligible to go to K through 12, okay? You take that into consideration, and so if there's 200, you multiply that by 0.5, that means that there's 100 kids that could attend Glendale Elementary, as an example. But in the demographic study, and it's going to vary on school district, the capture rate, and ours is decreasing, and I would encourage you to please look at that report, because I think it will answer some of those questions. But basically, if it's 70%, that means of those 100 kids, only 70 students will come to Glendale Elementary. So as you see, and I'm sure as people ask, but what about all this residential development? Just take that concept. Even if you did 2,000, Madam Superintendent, can we go back to that ADM chart that, I apologize, the 8,000 is not to size, but I still think that it gives, hopefully, a visual. So even if you take 2,000 students and you apply that concept, just make up the number. 5,000. Just use that idea and that concept and just apply it, okay? But in reality, if you even take the 8,063, we would really have to grow by what it was in 2014, truly overnight, and be able to maintain that for nothing to change. And if you look at the demographic study, Mr. Bramer always tries to provide information that says, we know that all these permits, construction permits were pulled. This is what we believe may happen. And while there is residential development, it won't be enough, based on the information that we have, to go from 8,063 to what I'm going to round to 13,000. So just please consider that as you see development yourself. Residential, you can look at those Taylor Morrison homes on Glendale, wherever they might be. Just use that, and then it gives you an idea, okay, 70 kids. And just know that with every year, as we get closer to 2029, our capture rate decreases. So please look at that demographic study, and by year, it will give you the projection of that capture rate. As we update this demographic study sometime next year, you're going to get revised data, revised numbers, and so we just have to be mindful. You know, if it's 70 today, could it be 66 for the following year? And so that in that example, obviously, you're going to have less kids in the system. So just please take that into consideration. I've oversimplified it. The calculation's a little bit more complicated, but if you just take that concept it will give you an idea of, yeah, there's development, but it's not enough to change the course, at least not on the based on the information that we have.
And those capture rates are for kinder through 12th grade, correct? Or is it specifically for, in our study, is it K-8?
Madam President, members of the board, President Bartels, it's going to be specific to Glendale. So if you look at it, because the report, while there's other data, and I would encourage you to look at the data, but if you look at the data, it's going to be based on the projections that Mr. Bramer has used in some of his presentations, does take that into consideration in future years, right? So if the capture rate in 2027, as an example, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but if it were 64, he's taken that into consideration based on the development and growth that he might be seeing based on the data that he's getting from the city or county or whatever it may be from permits.
So even using your example, and let's say being hopeful that there is one student in every home, being super hopeful, we would take American, using that location as the example, we would take American from, from looking at our projected enrollment. I'm not sure what's there right now. The projected enrollment for this year was 578 students. Would take us, let's say, 678 students, but still that would not bring the school, American, up to a capacity.
No.
Madam President, members of the board, that's why we thought it was important that you see and have an idea. I would say this, I would be extremely shocked if you got into a situation where we were overcrowded. And if it happens, that's great, because we will build and we need to increase that number. I just, based on the information that we have, and again, the data that we showed you includes students that live in the grid. So if GEO kids, you take those from that chart that we showed you, and that would even decrease, it gives you more capacity at that site. Whatever site you want to focus on, it just gives you more capacity.
Thank you.
So, Madam President, members of the board, I'd like to just go back to the timelines for the communication to our community. I think that's critical. So we would begin those setting out. I think it was brought that we want to make sure it's on social media, everything. We will do a generic script so that the message is the same for everybody, so they all understand what that message is, so that we truly have the accurate information out there. And we will do it through social media, as we said before, and then we will work also to establish those guidelines to make sure that we're adhering to those, because we are in the middle of a pandemic. And we do know that tomorrow CDC is coming out with some new guidelines, but really from what we can understand, and Dr. Lafitte will probably address that during the board meeting under his metrics, is that from that it's really about focusing on mitigation, but other things are really still in place. So we want to make sure that we are following that, and we'll make sure that it's clear to everyone what the requirement will be, because we still are not, open to the public, but we will make sure everybody is clear, and we'll be able to better accommodate everybody that comes to those meetings.
Do we have any more questions, concerns?
I do have one more question. I keep saying that. So the last slide is the proposed community engagement. So we have March 1st at Bicentennial, March 2nd at Desert Garden, March 4th at Coyote Ridge, March 8th at Sign, and March 9th at Imes. And I'm just curious, is there a reason we didn't do Sign and Imes first, since they are part of Phase 1?
We didn't do it in any particular order. I mean, we just chose I think what we tried to do at first, we thought if we could combine schools, but then we figured that wouldn't work. So we just decided that we would do it in that particular order. Also, to be honest, we anticipate, and we could be wrong, that at Sign and Imes, because they are part of Phase 1 with closures, that we will have large numbers, and we need that time to prepare for those large numbers. So that was the only rationale in that particular piece, is because we anticipate, and we could be wrong, but we anticipate because they are phase one, identified as phase one, that they would have a larger public coming, and we wanted to make sure that we have enough time to prep those facilities.
Thank you.
Yeah. We also have the February 25th, so chances are there may be a higher number showing up for that meeting to speak.
It's really just prep on our side.
All right, anybody else? At this time, can I just call for a break and then we'll resume at 5:30? All right.
So moved.
I don't think we needed to vote on it, did we?
Do we need a second for that?
No.
Because I'll second it.
We're good. We'll be back at 5:30. Do we have Sarah?
Hello.
Hello. All right.
Can you hear me better?
I can, yes, thank you. All right. It is 5:30, and if you are just joining us, we are on item 3A, call to the public. Our first one is from Jeanette Rios. Hello. We are parents of 2 active students at Coyote Ridge School, and in August, we are expecting that our 3rd kid will enter at the same school. For us, that school has been a great help. They have given support to our family. Teachers and staff have always supported us, and we disagree that our school is being considered for closing. I don't think any school in Glendale should close with COVID around. We need to consider smaller groups, and it is necessary to have space and all the schools open. GEO for some students are not working, and my kids are them. Please do not close Glendale schools. From the Glendale Education Association, dear Board President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata Jones. As the timeline for school closures repurposing continues, we encourage you to move forward without the 22-23 school repurposing plan, currently known as Phase 2. It was said in the previous board meeting that school closures repurposing could be taken off the table at any time. We urge you to take action tonight to remove the 22-23, currently known as Phase 2, from the current timeline. Moving forward with the 21-22 school closure repurposing plan, currently known as Phase 1, we believe the following questions need to be answered before all stakeholders can take part in further discussions. Due to the pandemic, our student enrollment has drastically declined. What has the district done to find these students? What is the district's plan to obtain the missing attestation forms? All stakeholders deserve to see a detailed cost-benefit analysis of closing schools. We have been provided with our budget deficits due to declining enrollment. When can we expect to see how much money will be saved from closing or repurposing schools? 3, what is the district's long-term plan to attract students in the future? How has the district involved all employees in these discussions? 4, what will the additional transportation costs be for the newly reconfigured boundaries? And 5, what are the plans for the 21-22 schools, currently known as Phase 1, if the school board votes to close them? This is from Travis Ulan. Please keep this school open. It is a great school for the community, and he is referencing Save Coyote Ridge. And at this time, I'm going to ask Ms. Sagata Jones to assist me in Spanish reading.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board. This is from Teresa Lari. It says, Hola, buenos días. Soy mamá de una alumna de esta escuela Coyote. Nos pone muy triste que quieren cerrar la escuela. Amamos esta escuela, amamos a sus maestros. Si nosotros estuviera, la decisión sería no sería y seguir un día. Gracias, buen día.
I only have one translation. Oh. Okay. Hello, good morning. I am a mother of a student from Coyote Ridge. It makes us very sad that they want to close the school. We love the school. We love its teachers. If it were up to us, the decision would not be to close it and continue in it. And then the second one. Right? Because that was the one I just read. From Virginia, correct?
No, this is the one here. This is it here. Esa es la comunicación desde Virginia Torres. Hola, sabemos a que quieren cerrar Coyote Ridge. Habemos muchas familias y pertenecemos a esas escuelas. Lo pedimos reconsiderar en su decisión y siga en funcionamiento de antemano. Gracias. Virginia Torres.
Hello, we know that you want to close Coyote Ridge. We are many families who belong to that school. We ask you to reconsider your decision and keep it running. Thank you in advance. All right. At this time, we are on item 4, consent agenda. Are there any items that board members wish pulled aside? Hearing none, can I get a motion?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I will second.
Okay. Hearing a first and a second. Ms. Smith, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Pimentel?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
And Mr. Martinez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Motion passes. We are now on item 5, which is reports and information items.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, at this time, Dr. Lafitte will present the GSD Health Metrics Benchmark Update.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Superintendent Sagata Jones, can you click the clicker, or you want me to get it?
I'm the clicker.
Okay, thank you. So as you'll see, last week we started to have the conversation about the benchmarks with regards to the cases per 100,000 decreasing. So this week we have seen a significant decrease, though it's still in the substantial area, moving from the 600 range down to the 400 range. But our percent positivity still stayed in the same range, just decreasing slightly. Statewide, the COVID-like illness numbers have begun to decrease, moving back into that yellow range. And we'll see what that begins to look like over the next several weeks, as some of the reports are showing a decline across the state. So when we look at all of the schools within our surrounding area, we're still in that middle grouping again, with some districts in the 300s and some in the 400s. So we're at a 412. And if you look at our neighboring high school district, Glendale Union is at 385.15, and their percent positivity is just slightly lower than ours. By zip code, we're seeing the same trend. We're seeing those decreases come in. So when you look at 85302 and 85303, where we've seen some of our bigger decreases in our numbers. And our daily numbers, if you'll notice, those are starting to see a decrease as well. So a couple of things just to kind of add in this. No. You can go back one more slide. So if you start to look at our data, just one thing to keep in mind, when we think about our numbers and our movement, we do know that CDC will be putting out new guidelines that they've stated will come out tomorrow for all of the for all schools to look at with regards to moving back to hybrid or an in-person learning model. So when we get that information, we'll really take a look at it to see what's new. All of the indicators now are that it's really going to be focused more so on mitigation factors and things you can do to mitigate versus vaccinations and other things like that. We are still doing our vaccinations with partnering with Glendale Union and Washington Elementary this weekend, the 13th and 14th. That will take place for us, for our staff. Our site is Independence on Saturday and Moon Valley on Sunday. We do have several volunteers that will be participating in this. Then our staff has signed up as well. So this will be an opportunity for those who want to get vaccinated to get vaccinated. So any questions?
I don't know if this is valid, but do we have an idea of how many staff have been vaccinated yet? Or if that...
No, we don't. Madam President, members of the board, no, we do not track that information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on, we are now up to 6A, and the item is in-person learning.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, I believe that was requested by Board Member Smith.
It was requested by me, and I appreciate what Dr. Lafitte had to say and the report that we had. But I'm bringing this to us because I'm just going to start by saying is I think our children need to be back in our schools attending, and there are multiple reasons, and I'll give you my reasons, and that way we can discuss this. One, as I was watching the news, whatever, this week or last week, I saw what the head of the CDC say. There's no evidence that COVID-19 spreads, in our K-8 schools, and then the other reason I think children should be in there is because we have the mitigation strategies in place because we've already started the hybrid earlier in the year, and we spent $3 million, and the district has done a great job, getting the mitigation strategies in place. And then another thing that it says on the CDC site is, which is also can be changed, but it says, can hospitals handle the cases? And I know that we can. I saw on the news also that now there's fewer COVID hospital beds in use than there are other in the ICU. So we have the strategies and the hospital beds, and those were some of the things that were listed on the CDC site. And then, as it was mentioned, in the past presentation, that teachers are immunized, or they're going to be, in the at least this weekend, or they've had it already. I've seen some people already have that. And then I'm going to bring up one of our neighboring school districts. So Peoria School District has had their children going to school every day, and they are not having, the spread like they have, so that the CDC is saying. And I looked at their numbers; they've been at like 25%, which is about the same percent, that we are in some areas, and. So, to me, that shows, that, schools can't be open and children can go. And then also the high school district is sending out a survey on Friday to all parents on reopening. I have no idea what the survey is going to say, but that's happening also. So they have a committee that they're using in order to, discuss whether they should reopen. And then we've been, talking about repurposing and closing schools, and I really feel that it's hard to make, financially sound decisions if without the knowledge of where our ADM really is going to stand. And I think the sooner we get our kids back in the school, then we can know a little bit better about where our financial problems, are going to stand. And then right after this is when we're going to, be talking about our a resolution about, systemic racism. And I feel like not having our kids in the classroom is not meeting the gap that some of our poor students are having. And, we need to get them back in our schools. So now I'm done with what I want to say. So now the rest of you guys can talk.
Thank you, Board Member Smith.
Is it possible that we can discuss a potential date?
Here's what I think we, as Dr. Lafitte said, we'll look at what CDC. Here's what we know that we've had discussions about so far, and there has been, as of today, and Dr. Peterson and Carvalho will correct me if I'm wrong. We do know that through Arizona Department of Education that we will be required still to do a Zella testing, and we will still be required to do AZ merit testing. AZ merit testing, there's been conversations whether or not the 95% tested would be waived at the federal government level. It has not been waived at that time, so those two types of assessment have to occur, and they have to occur in person. So at some point, we will have to return students back to the classrooms to take AZ merit as well as Zella. There has been no indication that ADE is going to waver on that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Peterson, but with that, they're obviously to get all of our students tested, to do it in using our great mitigation plans. That is going to take longer than it typically would sometimes. So Ed Service has already been working on what those schedules might look like. So although our metrics, and we've made the decisions, as we said, based off on the metrics, we hope that the trend on the metric continues to go down and that we would reach a hybrid model before we'd have to begin testing. It's hard to predict that, but if we do not see a hybrid in the yellow, which we did last time when we were in the yellow, we did a hybrid model. If we don't see that, we will be forced to bring students back anyway because we have to do testing for them, at least in grades 3 through 5. So we have just begun those conversations yesterday, in fact, because we thought we were going to hear whether or not the 95% or any change in testing would occur. It was made very clear to us that Azello, you will still test those students, and it was made very clear with AZ Merit that still will have to take place. So again, how do we create those environments, a good testing environment for students? We need to remember that we have some of our schools who have not, staff has not been here, teachers have not been here since last March. So we need to think about timelines for that. So that environments are conducive to that and what that looks like as well. And then we have kids, obviously have not been on campus as well. The focus right now for us is 3 through 8 because those students have to be assessed. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Jerry Peterson and Carvalho.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Sagata-Jones, entirely right. It is AZM2, or otherwise known as AZ Merit, is still required at the state level, and a 95% participation rate is still in place at the federal level as of today. AZ-Sci, which is the new AIMS science test, is on the same kind of platform and the same kind of 95% tested. The thing that you may have heard in the news or through legislators' conversations is that what the State Board of Ed has done is that it has put forward a resolution to legislators to waive the A to F accountability system, which would mean that the letter grade would be given, but yet a test would be required. So to know where your students are academically. So 3rd through 8th would be taking AZ M2 and AZ Sci. And then obviously our K-8 ELL students will need to be taking Azella as well. They have extended the windows for all those assessments. AZ M2 and AZ Sci cannot start until April 5th, but we have until middle of May to end that assessment with all of our students in 3rd through 8th. Azella, the window used to be February to the middle of March. Now that window is extended to May 18th. And so just mapping all that out in order to see where we're at, whether it was in a hybrid model or an all-in-person model, we would need to start assessing our students in order to get them all the way through the process. Let's just say we were in a hybrid model, because as that means it's only half your students are taking all those tests every other day. We would need to start on April 5th, and that would take us until May 18th to get through all of those assessments. Our 5th and 8th graders, if you're an ELL student in 5th or 8th grade, you would be taking the most assessments because you have Azella, AZ Sci, Reading 1, Reading 2, Math 1, Math 2, Writing. All of that would have to happen in that amount of time. So that would need to start by April 5th at the very latest.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson and Kavaya. I'd also like to add to that, in preparation to that, and I know Board Member Smith said that the neighboring Glendale Union High School District was doing a survey. We've also began to craft a survey because knowing that we will be doing the testing, we would like to know from a parent's best guess of if their students are returning, because we need to plan for that. We need to do the shift from meal services, would be in person. We need to get transportation routes ready, those things again. So we need to prepare for that as well. So it would be our intent to survey our parents just so we know exactly how many would be coming through the doors to do that. But so that's what we have on the latest, is that unfortunately the testing has to take place. And Dr. Peterson and his team have worked extremely hard on trying to extend that window as late as possible so that we could get at least to a metrics that had a hybrid. And hopefully by then it will be in that. But if it's not, then we do have strong mitigation plans in place. Also with that, and I'll let him continue at the conversations that we've had and we'll have with teams and our site administrators and those that the testing has to be, as he said, it could be on a hybrid model. But also with that, we need to think about allowing time for our teachers. Our teachers have not been in their classrooms, and so I don't, and also we have talked about, and we'll get input from people as well, is a transition for students. It seems like if you come back the first day and you're going right into days and days of testing, that might not be the best thing. Students haven't been back in classrooms. They haven't seen some of their peers in that, so we would want some type of adjustment for that. But again, we would seek input from those about how much time and preparation our teachers would need and how much time in that for a transition for students. It just feels, I guess the word for me is uncomfortable saying, welcome back, and okay, you're going to sit in hours and hours of testing when they've been gone. And our teachers as well, they've seen their students, obviously virtual, but it's different to see them in person and be excited. And I think they need an opportunity to take time for that as well. So we are just beginning those conversations. I think I don't know that we thought it was going to change with ADE, but those planning of actually what an actual timeline would look like takes a lot of prep, so that's kind of where we are on that. And I'm sure we can answer, or Dr. Peterson can answer any questions you might have.
If I may add to that, Superintendent Salgado-Jones, obviously geo-learning is an aspect of this that has to be added into the whole mix, because even though those students, would be learning from home normally, pandemic or not, they still have to test in person. And so with AZM2, AZSci, and Azella. So in order to make that occur on campuses, whether it's hybrid or even all in person, what campuses can have the capacity to allow that to happen, to rotate students through that really are not even, that's their home school. So that we are starting to figure that out. But like I mentioned to the administrators today during a meeting is, okay, we have hybrid plans in place, we have all in-person plans in place, and we are starting to talk about what if it's still in the red or decisions are made where we're not in person at all, how we need that plan in place too. Like, so we're having, instead of just creating one assessment schedule this year, we're having to create at least 3 just to plan for, just in case.
And again, amongst the other districts, when we participate in those meetings as well, you'll start to see that across the other districts as well. They're beginning to have conversations about what does a return look like to accommodate the testing. So it's not unique to GSD, it's what's going to have to happen.
And I'd like to add, I think, let's face it, this last year and a half has just been horrific for all of us. I mean, mentally, we know, and unfortunately you had to report to us about students and former students that, for whatever reason, just are not handling all of this isolation well. And we know adults aren't either, so, I think that mental aspect is critical right now too. We've got to give everybody hope.
I'd like to add that I would love to have kids back at school, and I understand that, I know that Peoria is already in person, but I have friends and family that have kids that go to Peoria, and every single one of them has been home on quarantine at some point because of exposure while they had at school. And just looking at the graph that's on the monitor here, 9 out of the 10 weeks that are on this graph, Peoria had a higher case incident than GESD. So I don't know if that's the benchmark that we want to set for ourselves to reopen. I think we set the benchmark to what was supported by the facts and supported by the benchmarks that were given to us by the CDC and the Arizona Department of Health, and we stick to those. I'm not here to be pressured by another school district because they decide to reopen prematurely. I'll let them deal with that. As far as my kids are concerned, I will send them back to inside school when it is safe and not a moment before.
Thank you, Board Member Martinez.
Yeah, I'd like to make sure that our staff feels safe as well. We certainly don't want to pressure them to come back when they don't feel like, they're ready. So, like Board Member Martinez said, I think there's a lot of factors involved, and I think the wait and see what the CDC says and what our positivity rate is, and I'm not pressured by any other school district as well. So
Thank you, Board Member Wilson. Also, with that, I know I just want to make it clear too, and I think Board Member Bartels brought that up, we don't track our staff that has been vaccinated, but also we can't assume that they all have been. I think all of you have shared at some point, if you were being vaccinated or chose to, some frustrations with trying to get appointments. Again, the pods are for our staff that want to is this weekend, and then they still need a second dose, and that's still 28 days, and that's if they choose to do that vaccination or not. So I understand that. I appreciate your comments. I will let others speak as well. We've always looked at those metrics, and we want to do that. I am not proposing that we open the doors. I want to make that clear to our staff and community because we said we would make decisions based off the metrics. However, when we are required by the state to test students, then we have to do that. And that's the only reason we would consider going against the metrics, is because we are being forced to test our students, and I think that's important for people to know. I do appreciate your comment, Mr. Martinez. I have a grandson who's been quarantined 3 times, who attends another district as well. Thank you. Other questions?
Okay.
So when was the survey that you're putting together going to come out?
We have just began looking at that survey, so it would go out early next week. We have a short week next week with the holiday, and they want to get that survey into Spanish as well.
And then after you get the results, then how long does it take you to get that together?
The results is pretty quick turnaround. Within a day or two, depending on what we ask in the survey. But that's a very quick turnaround for us to do.
And then your other part was, getting the schools, back ready and people in classrooms. What's your estimate and amount of time to get, a school ready to get back to normal? Our classrooms are ready. They've been ready and they're cleaned all the time, and they're all set up for mitigation because at any point, we could go into a hybrid. So we've always maintained that. I think the concern, then we have to have conversations with our principals, and they can talk to their teachers, and that as well is to return to testing environment. You have to remember, we set up for teachers who have not been back. We set up their classroom so they need time to orientate themselves of what that classroom looks like. And so those conversations, I think, is best answered by teachers and their administration. So we'll look at that as well. But we just haven't started those conversations. But there has to be time for them to get into their classroom. And then we need to talk about what to expect on what we need to do as far as any other program services for how many kids might be returning.
Any other questions?
Right.
Okay. All right, hearing none, we are now on item 6B, anti-racism resolution.
Good evening. Yes, Madam President, members of the board. Yes, I believe Board Member Pimentel asked to bring some resolutions to you to have a discussion tonight.
Good evening. I have been wanting to do this for a while, and I don't have small children, but I know some, and there's a lot of questions that have come up in the last year about racism, and I compiled a list of different suggestions for a resolution, anti-racism. I feel it's important for our students, our community, our teachers, our staff to understand that we will not put up with any racism as a district. I feel it's important for our community to know this. And so if you take a look at what we have, the very first resolution that you see in front of you, it is from ASBA, with the exception of one column that I added in that I borrowed from another district. And I took some examples from all over the country. And so you'll see that some are a lot longer, you'll see some are a lot shorter. But I think this would go a long way in showing our community that we won't condone racism of any kind. And I'm hoping that we can come to an agreement tonight and actually have this done at the next board meeting. Do you need this?
What was the change that you added to the ASBA one?
It is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 whereas. I included that. This that I took, the first page, with the exception of that 6th whereas, is from ASBA. They signed this, and it's on their page. I got this from their African American Network chair.
I'm confused. So the first one,
So we're, I believe what has been added is, correct me if I'm wrong, whereas members of the governing board condemn the killing of George Floyd, that's the piece that has been added.
No, that is part of ASBA.
Oh, that's ASB's, I'm sorry.
What has been added says,
The equity one?
whereas the district has a shared core value of equity, where we celebrate our diversity and will
Okay.
provide the necessary resources and supports to eliminate barriers to success and foster a more equitable future for all our students.
Questions, comments?
I think being Black History Month, I think the timing of this is especially important, and if we can hammer this out today to put it on the agenda for later this month, I think that kind of sends a message. It's another one that's, I'm not big on for resolutions, but I don't see anything wrong with it. This kind of reflects a way what I believe all of us kind of feel. I know that if I was privileged enough to spend the rest of my days smacking down Nazis, I would consider it a life well spent. Obviously, that's not in the resolution, but I don't see anything here that should cause any sort of conflict.
Madam President, members of the board, also, we would, whatever direction the board wants to go, we would also run this through legal as well, just to make sure.
well, and I think the most critical thing in this, because equity is talked about, and in fact, I actually listened to an equity symposium earlier today, and this was a key discussion, and the reality is we need to keep talking. We need to actually, as a board, do a better job of, asking those questions about our policies, about our plans, how, making sure we're not creating those disparities that we know exist.
That's correct, and we can't overlook anything.
Because that's the only thing. I don't want this to, I don't have any objection to this. I just don't want to see it sitting on a shelf and we never go back. So we need to truly make this a core for
Agreed.
reality here.
Yeah, and I think it's important that the board make a stand on this. It's important for the community to know where the district stands, where the board does. And I think this covers, a lot, if not everything. And I have no objections to this. I think we need to move forward.
So by moving forward, we would go ahead and send, let's identify which one we want to send to legal counsel. We'll get their guidance on that, and then we would bring it back to the next governing board meeting.
And we're talking about the first one.
The first one is the one that I did get from ASBA. I found interesting, if you look at the second resolution from a local school district, I found it interesting that what they put in their resolution is that they are committed to continuing to address systemic racism towards Black students and will continue to prioritize and target their academic achievements. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find where they were going to do this through teaching, include this in their curriculum. Here it goes. It's the last paragraph on page 3. And they said that adopting updated policy, discipline policy, and providing training and curriculum that is culturally responsive. And I didn't include that in ours. However, I believe that may be something we can come back to. As President Bartel says, we can't just let this sit on a shelf. This can be something that we take forward.
I just want to say that, one, I don't really care for resolutions either, but I have a problem with the first paragraph. I don't like naming the people. You know, I would just prefer that we just say that we don't like injustice and systematic or systemic racism, those type of things, and just not name the people that are up there, because I feel like it's too political instead of just broad.
I think it's important that we have examples to remind our staff, our students, ourselves of very real people, very real cases, and very real reasons that we need this resolution. I would personally leave the names in there.
Yeah, I think it shows why, you know, we have to have a resolution, or, you know, where exactly, you know, it was developed and why it was developed.
These are factual names.
I would definitely agree with you. It's kind of like trying to separate Rosa Parks from busing issues, or from, you know, issues with the bus system. I think examples are good. I think they're pointed, and they cannot be ignored, because if you just say this group of people has bad stuff happen to them, it just rolls over. It doesn't make anything. But if you can tell someone this person, this person, this person, this person, this person, and unfortunately that list just goes on and on. Exactly. I think leaving that in there makes a point that not only do we recognize the broader scope of the issue, we recognize that individually this is impacting people in our district.
Yes.
Okay, with that, then we can seek legal counsel. They will give us their advice. We'll bring that back to you, and then we'll place it again on the next agenda, which would be February 25th.
All right, we are now on item 7, future meetings and events. And at this time, if any board members have items they would like added, this is the time to do it.
We will obviously add February 25th. We'll add a recommendation for a resolution.
Now, the other question is, does anybody else need another study session before that meeting for any more further updated information that maybe we did not get answers to tonight?
With regard to any specific issue, or?
Phase 1, Phase 2, you know.
Well, you would be able to still have a study session prior to the March 11th board meeting. I would recommend that.
On the 25th, the time is 5:30 for the public hearing. So can we make sure that all other board business is done before 5:30?
That's the board can decide that the time for the public hearing cannot change, and it has to begin at 5:30. So you would have to determine a time to start the regular board meeting.
At this time, do we know what kind of stuff we might be looking at for that meeting?
I don't know what's on there that we would necessarily have to have. Ms. Valdez, are you bringing anything for the 25th?
I think if we can keep the agenda light for the 25th, it shouldn't really be much of an issue, because we kind of some of these we can kind of zip through pretty quick.
So maybe.
I might recommend, if I may, and Mr. Bergen might have something to say. I think he was going to say something. I would leave it after, because that's typically where it would fall. And if there's not very many items, it'll be done very quickly anyway. And then then you don't have gaps in between starting at 5:30, or if it extends past the 5:30, we can't afford for it to not start on time for our public hearings, because that's the required time we've posted. Mr. Berrigan.
Madam President, members of the Board, Superintendent Scott, the only thing I just want to remind everyone is the sale of bonds, I believe, will be about the 25th, if I remember correctly, so I just don't want to lose sight of that in the discussion, and that would be a little bit more of the formal presentation, so I just want to keep that on the radar.
So can we maybe keep tentatively like 3:30 start time, so that hopefully we can, if it's a lighter one, except for that bond presentation, we definitely would need a little more time, because we can always stop the meeting, go to the hearing at 5:30, and then finish whatever's not done. But I'm thinking if we've got a bond presentation, if we can start that and get it done beforehand. Otherwise, you're going to have somebody sitting here for a very long time that night.
That's the direction of the board, what you'd like to do.
I can be here at 3:30.
I would rather keep it at 5:30, but I can be here at 3:30 if the rest of the board wants it that way.
Okay.
I'm kind of torn. So your suggestion is to start the board meeting at 3:30 and then just pick up the public portion of it after?
Do the hearing.
At 5:30 or whenever?
The public meeting the hearing has to begin at 5:30.
Oh, okay.
It has to begin at 5:30.
Okay, that's fine. That works. I can be here at 3:30 as long as the public meeting starts up at 5:30. So
that would have to.
That everybody has a chance to get here.
Yeah. Because we can always rearrange that agenda so that those things that may take up more time start earlier. That way, anything, if we just can't get to it after the hearing, it may not be as critical, or it could maybe even be handled telephonically as a catch-up item within a few days afterwards, depending on how long that night goes. Did any board members have any items they wish to have on future agendas? Okay. All right, hearing none, we are now at our summary of current events, starting with Ms. Sagata-Jones.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, and I think we've shared all of our summaries and current events, but some things just to remember that we've done a lot of our celebrations. Our celebrations for our cells and counselors and support staff and social workers. Again, on Friday, which is tomorrow, we'll be celebrating our transportation department, Love the Bus. We do want to thank publicly Peter Piper Pizza for their donation. Yesterday was National Pizza Day, and for our office staffs, they delivered to them pizzas shaped in a heart, so the office staff was able to enjoy that. Again, thank you to all of our sites. They've done some incredible virtual things that are taking place. Also, we look forward to the Read Across America, and they're asking a lot of virtual readings to take place, so we look forward to that. But everyone working extremely hard, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate still the partnerships that we have during this pandemic. Again, thank you to all of GESD and also to the community for bringing their concerns to us. We appreciate that. And, happy Valentine's Day on Sunday. That is my favorite holiday of the year. The love bug comes, and I like to see what the love bug does and brings to little children and makes their hearts smile. So on that day, please make someone's heart smile. With that, I conclude my report.
At this time, we are on Governing Board report. Ms. Smith, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I just want to thank our administration for their hard work this entire past year, and thank you for giving us the information that we need and for going forth, with our plans to make the district financially solvent. And everyone, just enjoy your Valentine's Day. Thank you.
Ms. Pimentel?
Yes, I would just like to say I think it's pretty amazing that we were able to set up vaccinations for GESD and GUHSD and I believe Washington, WESD. Because when I tried to make an appointment for myself at the stadium, it was a no-go. Just didn't happen. So I think it's, and it was probably that way for a lot of our teachers as well. So for the teachers and staff that are getting vaccinations, keep going and take advantage of that, because that's a great offer. Good luck to our students who are going to be in the spelling bee. They are better spellers than I am by far, and I think that's just amazing. As always, a big thank you to our teachers, our staff, everybody employed here at GESD, and to our community. And everyone, please mask up, be healthy.
Okay. Ms. Wilson?
Just happy Valentine's Day and enjoy your 3-day weekend.
Mr. Martinez?
Happy Valentine's Day. I brought you nothing, just like I brought everybody else. No, I want to say thank you to the administration again for getting all the information. I know you've been bombarded with a ton of questions. I hope we answered a lot of them during the study session today, and we still have all those public sessions to go through. So if you have questions, ask somebody, ask us, ask the administration, send in an email, put a sign out in my front yard. I don't care. We will do our best to answer everything you sent to us. So again, awesome work. Thank you again for setting up getting the vaccination site set up. Actually volunteered to go help out at the vaccination site, and they said they had so many volunteers that they didn't need me.
That's correct. They were over, at first when we communicated with the superintendent, Brian Capistrano, we were, and with Superintendent Paul Stan, was how many are we going to, do we have enough volunteers, and what do we need to do? And so very much people volunteering their time, and he had to send the rejection letters out because there were so many, but we do appreciate that, so thank you.
It wasn't the first rejection letter I've ever gotten, but thank you. It was my pleasure to volunteer, even if you didn't need me. So, thank you.
Okay. I'd just like to piggyback on everything everybody has said up to this point, but I also want to remind people, while we're all in the same storm, we're not all in the same boats. We do not know the challenges that each other has going through all of this stuff over the last year and beyond. But I would encourage everybody, just make somebody smile this weekend. It's the weekend of love, whether it's your kids or your kids for you, but find joy. We all need a little joy right now. Definitely, everybody, enjoy the Valentine's Day, even though it'd be cold and possibly rainy. But at this time, I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
I hear no nays.
Wait, nay.
Have a good weekend.